A controversial new sex education book for teenagers that had to be pulled from shelves in Australia is making waves after hitting New Zealand libraries. Library goers and parents are divided on the book Welcome to Sex, your no silly questions guide to sexuality, pleasure and figuring it out by former Dolly doctor, whatever that was, and youth health expert Dr. Melissa Kang, and I imagine TV Australian personality Yumi Steins. The book traverses everything from consent and sexuality to sexual positions, pleasure, and information on sex acts such as oral sex, scissoring, and fingering. Some have viewed it as a safe and important resource for teens, and others said it was too graphic and inappropriate. But as a general rule, despite anger about the fact that these books are freely available in our libraries, librarians are saying they are not interested in becoming or censors. They are going to continue to array this. Joining us to talk about this and sex education in our schools in general is the Chief Executive of Family First New Zealand, Bob McCoskrie. Bob, good morning to you. Welcome to the show.
Morning, Michael. Good to be with you.
Have you read the book?
Yeah, parts of it.
I haven't. So what's it like?
Well, I think the real test is for parents simply to watch a presentation on our website where we've given sort of a preview of some of the more objectionable stuff, and I think parents will quickly realise just how extreme it is. We're not talking about simple birds and the bees and sex education. This is getting into the extremes. I think the article you just quoted from, if I'm correct, is the Herald version.
Yeah.
Would that be correct?
That's right.
Now, the reason I know that is because one of the interesting things about the mainstream media coverage is that they've been very quiet on some of the extreme elements of the book. So they go on about the outrage about the book, but they don't actually say why there's an outrage. So I read the One News coverage, and I'm quoted in that. And one of the interesting things is that they don't make any mention about the fact that the book, which is targeted for children as young as 8 years old, according to the authors, covers topics such as anal sex, scissoring, oral sex, fingering with images, and nude texting, how to send nudes safely. Now, One News didn't put that in their report at all. The Herald put a couple of those topics in, but conveniently left out instructions on anal sex and nude texting. Now, remember, sexting, same thing. Now, remember, this is for a book that the authors admit would be good for 8-year-olds to read. I think parents would be horrified.
Right. Now, this book is not available in our schools, though, is it?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that there'll be some activist librarians who will be getting it into their school. It is available online. I saw that some of the online stores like Mighty Ape and Wheelers were stocking it. Interestingly enough, Wheelers actually said it was for 13 years plus. I think that's still too young, but interesting, they put an age restriction on it, but some librarians just don't want to. And the major retailers, as far as I'm aware, it's not online on their online portal, but I think a few individual shops may be stocking it. Look, you can get your hands on it if you want. My warning to parents is go in with both eyes open and actually preview it before you show children, because I think most of them will throw it in the bin before their children get anywhere near it.
You'll remember, and I introduced this topic this morning by saying that I remembered a book that came out in the 70s that attracted very similar kind of sentiment. Dr. Alex Comfort, you might probably remember this one, Bob, The Joy of Sex. Remember that? It was done in...
I must be too young, Michael.
Well, what I guess I was saying was that but I think that was mostly aimed at adults rather than teenagers. Although teenagers would make a buzz for it, and I remember it being put in libraries, and it was never taken out by adults. It was always adolescent and prurient boys, but me included. But I was just wondering in this particular case. Sex education in general, I was making also in my introductory remarks, we've tended to surrender to the schools because it's a conversation that most parents actually feel uncomfortable about, yeah?
Well, no, that's not what our research has shown. We actually did some polling around this issue, and we found out that actually parents are comfortable with it. It's just that they feel undermined, not only by what's happening in schools, but I think also the fact that children are being exposed to it online as well. I mean, they're being targeted with those types of images and advertisements every time they go onto social media. So parents are up against it. Our argument is that we need to be equipping parents to have these conversations and giving them confidence. But what they're doing is they're finding that schools are undermining, they're polluting their kids' minds with these books and with what the curriculum is now teaching, and teaching kids that they can choose from 112 genders and more than 200 sexualities. And, kids are getting confused by all this, and they actually don't have an anchor of just parental values. I think many parents would be really concerned and upset and offended by a lot of the material that's being taught, but the Ministry of Education has done a good job of keeping it well undercover, and it's only been a few groups that are starting to expose exactly just how radical and extreme this teaching is.
There is also research that shows, Bob, that the average Australian child, I haven't seen it for New Zealand, but I was reading this in the Sydney Morning Herald and preparing for this interview this morning, is exposed to pornography at the age of 11. So the average Australian student is exposed to pornography at the age of 11. So the argument is that if they are going to be exposed to it, this sort of resource is an alternative and a much preferred one. Do you buy that argument?
Well, I don't actually. You'll be surprised, Michael. I don't buy that it's as late as 11 years old. I think they'd be exposed to it much younger than that. They only need to watch mainstream TV to see a lot of pornographic images or tune into Naked Attraction accidentally. So, look, the culture is throwing extreme sexual images, pornography at very young children. So I think it's probably younger than 11, but that doesn't mean that we suddenly say, oh well, they're seeing this type of material, so therefore we need to encourage it. We need to show them how to have anal sex because there's absolutely no problems with it. I mean, you've got to understand that this latest book is targeted at young people because it's got cartoons. I mean, it's got a young girl talking about the fact that, the lowdown on anal sex and what you need to do to prepare for it, and about tickling and licking. And I mean, look, I don't know if you're subject to Broadcasting Standards Authority.
No, we're not, so you can go for your life. No, thank God.
Well, we've just breached it. Theoretically, we've just breached it, and that's what I find ironic, is that if any, One News or News Hub or Radio New Zealand asked me to come and talk about this book, I wanted to read some extracts from it, they would not let me because they would breach broadcasting standards. Why is it that we breach broadcasting standards when we cover this material with adults listening, and yet for some reason we think it's okay for 8 and 9-year-olds to read? We're simply polluting their mind. And look, I think if the pornography industry is targeting our young kids, we need to be putting up shields. We need to be working with internet companies to provide safe surfing, in effect. That's what we really should be focusing on. We shouldn't be just, putting up the white flag and saying, okay, well, let's just treat kids like adults and let's show them it all. That's just a stupid approach. Kids just can't cope with that, and that's why they're so stressed.
I understand the logic of what you're saying, and the sexualization of teens and of children. Gosh, that's been around as long as I've been an adult, and particularly at the start of this century, I guess, with the videos, the pop videos and the rock videos, but mostly pop actually, and rap, that show an overt sexualization, and their target audience being primarily young teen girls and young teen boys. I understand all that, Bob, but I'm really interested, you will be too, in some of the evidence that's coming out. The most recent one I saw was published in Scientific America, which we all would accept as a pretty... You seen that?
I wouldn't quote Scientific American. Actually, that was one of the journals that was quoted obsessively during the birth certificates debate, when we figured out that we could just put our own sex on our birth certificate. So it didn't matter what happened at birth, boy or a girl, we can now just determine it. And there was a Labour MP who was constantly quoting from Scientific American that there's not just two genders. There's clearly, there's more. There's 112 apparently, and it grows every day. So, unfortunately, sorry, Michael.
No. Well, I don't think that's a very good argument, Bob, because just because Scientific America reports research that's done, it doesn't make it up itself. It doesn't do its own.
Okay.
So Scientific America would have reported a research report from somebody else. And they are probably one of the more reputable scientific journals in the world. And they have reported a study from something called the Archives of Sexual Behaviour, doing a study between the years 2009 2018 on adolescents in the United States of America, over 4,000 surveyed through that time period, in which they show that there has been, despite what you and I might consider the overt sexualisation of our society, that younger people are having sex less. Have you come across that research at all? Because I haven't seen that just written in Scientific America, although I'm quoting a few of that, but I've also seen that in a number of mainstream news media articles over the last year.
Actually, we've been saying that for a while, and actually that has actually shown up in the Auckland University Youth 2000 reports. So that's a survey of 8,000 students around New Zealand. They've done it about 4 times: 2000, 2007, 2011, 2018 maybe. I probably got those years wrong, but about 4. And they've noticed the trend, and what they've found is that teenagers are, the perception is that teenagers are just constantly, everybody's having sex, teenagers are having it. But in fact, what they found is that it's a very, very low proportion of students that are currently sexually active in high school. And in fact, many of them are still virgins. That's one of the interesting things in this latest book that we started talking about, Michael, is that one of the quotes is, "Virginity is an outdated concept. The word virginity should be erased from the dictionary." And that's a direct quote. So that sort of tells you what the worldview of the authors is.
Yes, I don't dispute. I mean, Yumi Steins, for example, is an Australian feminist, and she's in her late 40s and has been, if you like, a radical feminist for a long period of time. I mean, she's actually the last person I'd want to teach my children anything, let alone their sexuality. Yeah. But what I guess I'm trying to say is, despite the overt sexualisation of our society, pornography being everywhere, sex education being taught in our schools at younger age, more and more explicit stuff, it's almost as if the younger generation, and I'm talking about under the age of 30, which you've mentioned as well, are almost saying, no thanks, not interested. We're actually not going to have sex unless we are seriously in love or in like with somebody. Recreational sex is passé. It's something you baby boomers do it. We're not going to do it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that we have moved from probably your and my understanding of sexual involvement, which is based on physical contact and intimacy and relationship, and we've moved, because of pornography, to it's purely visual. And so I noticed that one thing about that study that you quoted is that they say that a lot of it's because of social media. They can see it on social media, and they're too busy gaming. They're doing other visual stuff. So they've forgotten actually that sex is a great thing, because there's all these other self-consuming activities that they can do. And if they feel sexually frustrated, well, there's porn to watch. And so who needs a relationship? Who needs intimacy? Who needs sexual involvement? And in fact, who needs commitment? So that's it's a level of narcissism, Michael, that we're heading towards, and hedonism, where we're just concerned about sexual gratification, but it's a narcissistic approach in that it doesn't involve commitment or sacrifice or anything that we've understood that would involve a relationship, commitment or monogamy. Those are out the window, and that's a real concern. But I think it's harming young people, and it's stressing them out, because they realise they're missing out on the intimacy that we all desire.
I don't know. Just, Bob, how old is your youngest child?
19.
Okay. I've got an 18, a 16 and a 14-year-old. So it's been, and they're all socially well connected in terms of they've got friends and friend groups. And one of the things that strikes me is, it's anecdotal information obviously, is that I don't think they're missing out on intimacy. It's just that they've got no intention of getting involved in something just for sexual gratification. I actually think that despite their father, who came from a much more libertine and liberal past, they are, and their friend groups and their peer groups, I think refreshingly connected. What you don't agree? I'm not talking about my daughters, but at that generation.
Yeah, I think the connection, and look, maybe just from our observation of our own children, but a lot of it tends to be online. I think there's a lot more connection that people are doing online, whereas you and I used to actually have to get out the door and actually meet down at a venue or at a group or go to the movies together. A lot of connection and relationship is happening in the online capacity.
That's true.
And one of the research outcomes that they say that is problematic is that children are losing the ability to have empathy. In other words, they can't read body language. They struggle a little bit with emotions of other people because often they don't see those emotions behind a keyboard or behind a screen. And so, therefore, those relationships are harder. Maybe that's why people are delaying. I mean, there's no doubt, Michael, that the research shows that people are getting married much later and they're also having children much later in life. And part of that is that ability to settle down, find that right partner, get the intimacy they want and the commitment that they want before they have children. But, yeah, look, I think things have changed, especially with social media, with screen time. That is a major factor. But I do worry for younger children. Fortunately, yours and my children are sort of slightly older, and hopefully we've instilled some values in them that they will make the right decisions. But I know, especially for young boys, it's just constantly in their face, the content, designed to arouse them, and it's a real struggle to avoid that. I remember when we presented a petition to Parliament about 5 years ago with 18,000 signatures asking for an inquiry into the social harms of pornography and to look to possible solutions. For example, when you sign up for internet, that the default setting is that it blocks harmful content. That's the default setting, and you actually have to, click out of that so that parents have a level of control. Safety when you're surfing on Wi-Fi in public places, better internet safety at schools, for example. And one of the questions I was asked by one news reporter on the steps was, Bob, have you ever watched pornography? And my response was actually, I don't go looking for it, but often I find on social media it comes looking for me. Now, interestingly, I got mocked for saying that on Twitter and etc. But when we actually surveyed people and asked them that exact question, it was well in the majority that people were saying, yeah, it's hard to avoid. It's constantly turning up on your feed even when you're not looking for it. And, that's a different type of environment that our kids are growing up in, that you and I, what was it? It was the hard copy of the Playboy magazine that maybe one of our friends' parents had. That was kind of the radical side of it, wasn't it?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think the influence of pornography, which I would have expected to be working the other way, and that would have been to, basically having kids rutting all the time. It's just, it's sort of counterintuitive to me to see, oh, good God, all the statistics show that, hell, these kids, despite this preponderance and proliferation and plethora of sexual material, are in actual fact deciding not to go for a swim in the river, but to stay on the bank. And I thought, that's sort of quite useful, really, if you know what I mean, Bob.
Well, it is, and it's definitely not because of the sexuality education which is being taught in schools. If anything, like this book, it's encouraging the activity.
Well, maybe. Listen, I'm being facetious, Bob, but maybe it's because it is being taught at school. I mean, I always had a very healthy disrespect of anything that my teachers told me. If my teachers are telling me about sex education, they're the last people I'd be listening to.
Well, and probably, some kids say that about their parents, but my encouragement to parents is that, you can build good relationship and you can speak into your child's life if it's in an open and accepting way, and, the children know that you're coming from a good space and they are safe to share what they're feeling. I mean, look, just while we were talking, I just looked up that Youth 19, so it was in 2019, I think I said 18, but the Youth 2000 survey, are you aware of that? That's the Auckland University one where they poll 8,000 kids across high schools across New Zealand. And what they found was that in 2001, about a third of high school kids had ever had sex, 31%. In 2019, 19 years later, it's down to 20. So just 1 in 5 high school students have ever had sex. Then they said, are you currently sexually active? Back in 2001, it was 20%. Were currently that week had sex. It is in 2019, it was 13%. So in a typical high school, just over 10% of the kids are currently sexually active. 90% are, as you say, making some good decisions, delaying it, looking for better commitment. And what are we doing? We're going into schools and we're basically saying, well, this is how you have anal sex, how to finger, how to do oral sex. Heck, let's start telling primary kids about it. It's polluting their minds and parents are sick of it.
All right. Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you for joining us. Oh, listen, just one final thing. Voluntary euthanasia, you and I are on different sides, obviously, of that issue. It's come in, it's the legislation, stuff like that. You were very strong about the danger and risk that it presented. You've seen it in operation now. It's been going, 2 years, I think, a little bit over.
Yeah.
Are you a little bit more satisfied, a little bit less fearful as a consequence of the practicality?
No, I think I'm still concerned because there's no guarantee that someone who's vulnerable and thinks that euthanasia is perhaps or they have a duty to die or the best option. Look, I know we disagree on that. I also am concerned that already there are calls for expansion of the law to beyond terminal. You only have to look over to Canada to see just how bad it's becoming. Canada next year are going to allow euthanasia for mental illness, and I think everybody is concerned about that. I think for disabled people it's still a concern. So no, I think we're still on the opposite side of that one. All
right, okay. Thank you very much for joining us, Bob. Nice to talk to you. Chief Executive Family First New Zealand, Bob McCoskrie. And yes, how can I talk about this issue I'm so passionate about? Well, listen, everybody's got a different view. All right. Yumi, the co-author of the sex book, Yumi Steins, as I said, is a well-known, part Japanese, I think. Her mum's was Japanese, feminist from Australia, sort of, I don't know. She's sort of, what's the equivalent of Uni Steins in this country? Can't think of one. Who's the redhead that did the cooking? Lost her hair. Well, some of her hair in ringlets when she was in Bolivia on that. This is 20 years ago. Who's that one? Josh? No, of course. What am I asking you for? Who would that be? Anyhow, she is the sort of equivalent of that, except in sex and feminism, not cooking, in Australia. And she has co-authored this book that has been published this year called Welcome to Sex with Dr. Melissa Kang. It was pulled from sales in Woolworths stores after criticism from Conservatives and also abuse from customers. So, ironic. All right, that is, having said that, she has been deliberately confrontational in most of the books that she has written and probably sees it as a marketing tool, in which case we've just contributed to her coverage.